Dust and disorder. Now, I want you to picture this cabin. Not the kind from storybooks, not the kind with curtains in the windows and smoke curling soft from the chimney. No. This cabin sat like a wound on the land, and the land was trying its level best to swallow it whole. Dust came sideways that evening. It hissed against the window glass like something alive and angry, filling every crack, every gap, every space where a man's hands hadn't gotten around to fixin'. The rags stuffed in the cracked front window had come loose again, and grit swirled across the floor in patterns that looked like small brown rivers running toward the stove. Inside, 3 children huddled near that stove, which gave more smoke than heat. The youngest, Rosie, barely 4, sat on the floor in a dress torn at the shoulder, staring at nothing with eyes too still for a child her age. Her brother Emmett shoved his older sister Clara, who shoved him back twice as hard and knocked his tin cup off the table. Nobody picked it up. Jasper Reeves came through the door at dusk like a man dragging his own ghost behind him. Boots caked in mud and manure, hands cracked raw from rope work, knuckles split and bleeding in 2 places. He'd been moving cattle since first light, 12 miles of dusty range with a bad-tempered bull and a fence line that wouldn't hold, and the day had taken more than it gave, same as every day since Margaret passed. Supper was cold beans from a tin. 3rd night running, he set it on the table without a word. Clara and Emmett fought over the spoon. Rosie didn't reach for anything at all. She just watched, hands in her lap, that terrible patience in her face that no 4-year-old ought to carry. After supper, if a man could call it that, Jasper knelt behind Clara with a length of blue ribbon and tried to braid her hair for church tomorrow. His fingers were thick, split at the tips, better suited to bridal leather than a girl's fine hair. He got 3 loops in before the whole thing came apart. He tried again. His hands shook not from cold, but from the particular exhaustion of a man who has been strong for too long. The braid fell apart again. Clara didn't complain, didn't sigh. She just sat there, still and patient, like she'd learned not to expect things to hold together. That was worse than any crying she could have done. Jasper let the ribbon fall to the floor and didn't pick it up. On the table sat a letter, the only reply to the notice he'd posted at the general store 3 weeks back. Seeking household help. Remote ranch. Room and board provided. Inquire at Reeves Place. 12 miles south of town. 12 miles was a fair piece for anyone. The pay was nothing but a roof and meals and the company of a man who'd forgotten how to talk about anything that wasn't cattle or weather. Only one woman had answered. She was coming tomorrow. Jasper checked the bolt on the cabin door. Checked it again. Then he blew out the lamp and lay in the dark, listening to the dust scrape against the walls like fingers trying to get in. He wondered what was wrong with her, the woman willing to come all this way for nothing. He'd find out soon enough. The woman at the gate. 3 days later, the dust had settled. Ada Brennan arrived on the Thursday supply wagon, sitting in the back between flour sacks and a crate of horseshoe nails, holding one canvas bag on her lap like it contained everything she owned in this world. It did. The cabin looked worse than the notice suggested, porch boards warped and groaning, the cracked window stuffed with rags. A chicken pecking at something dead near the front step. 3 children stood on the porch, staring at her. Like startled deer, the boy with his arms crossed. The older girl half hidden behind the doorframe. And the littlest one just watching with those 2 still eyes that seemed to take in everything and give back nothing. Ada climbed down from the wagon. She was a plain woman, sturdy in build, with steady hands and a way of holding herself like someone who'd spent years learning to take up as little space as possible. Her dress was clean but mended in 3 places: collar, cuff, and hem. Her bonnet sat low, but not low enough. The scar began beneath her left ear. It rippled down her jawline, across the side of her neck, and disappeared below her collar. Tight. Shiny skin, pulled and puckered like melted candle wax that had hardened in the shape of someone else's nightmare. A kitchen fire, 7 years ago. Grease on the stove, a gust through an open window. And then a sound she still heard some nights, that soft whump of flame catching cloth and skin at the same time. People saw it before they saw anything else. She'd learned to say it first. Get it done before the silence did it for her. Jasper came around the side of the cabin, wiping his hands on his trousers. He stopped. His eyes moved to her face the way everyone's did, that quick flicker down to the jaw, the neck. Ada straightened her spine. "I'm not pretty," she said. Jasper held her gaze. He didn't blink, didn't look away, didn't offer that pitying half smile she'd come to know, like a bruise that never quite healed. "That's fine," he said. "I need honest, not fancy." Ada stood very still. 30 years she'd been alive on this earth. She'd been stared at, whispered about, prayed over by well-meaning church ladies, and turned away from by 3 different families who'd wanted household help, but not her kind of household help. Not once, not a single time in all those years had anyone looked at her the way Jasper Reeves looked at her right then, like her face was just a face, like the scar was no more remarkable than the color of her eyes, like the rest of her was what mattered. She picked up her bag and stepped inside. The chaos hit her like a wall. Dishes crusted in the basin, some of them growing things, clothes piled in corners, a smell of burned beans, sour milk, and unwashed linens that had been building for months, maybe longer. Ada set down her bag, rolled up her sleeves, started with the dishes. That night, lying in the small room off the kitchen, she heard Jasper check the bolt on the front door, then check it again. She understood walls. She'd built enough of her own. First morning, next dawn, Jasper woke to something he hadn't smelled in over a year. Biscuits, real ones, golden-topped, steam rising from the split, coffee so strong the spoon nearly stood upright, eggs crackling in the iron skillet with salt pork sizzling alongside. He stood in the kitchen doorway in his stocking feet, one hand on the frame, and looked at a room he barely recognized. The dishes were done, every last one, scrubbed and stacked on the shelf. The rags in the cracked window had been replaced with a clean flour sack, folded neat, letting light through without the grit. The floor, Lord, the floor. He could see the grain of the wood for the first time in months, pale pine showing through where a year's worth of mud and neglect had been scrubbed away. One night she'd done this in one night. The table was set, 3 plates, 3 cups, 3 forks laid straight. His children sat in their chairs like they'd been told to, but nobody had told them. They just sat, drawn by the smell and the quiet order of the room, the way animals come to still water. Rosie looked up at him with a milk mustache and something on her face he almost didn't recognize. Peace. Jasper's hand tightened on the doorframe. His breath caught and held, and for a moment he forgot to reach for his hat. Something warm moved through his chest, something that felt like the first thaw after a long freeze, and just as dangerous. He nodded once to Ada. She nodded back, already turning the eggs. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his hat from the peg, and walked out without a word. An arrangement. That's what this was. Practical. A woman for the house, a man for the cattle. Nothing more. But riding out across the south pasture, the cabin growing small behind him, Jasper felt the distance between himself and that kitchen, like a rope pulling taut. One morning, and he couldn't manage without her. One breakfast, and his children had remembered what a table was for. Behind him. The cabin door stood unlocked for the first time since Margaret died. Ada needed to come and go fetching water, tend in the garden, hang and wash. That was the only reason. He almost believed it. Small repairs. 2 weeks changed everything. Ada mended what was torn and not just the clothes. She patched Emmett's trousers at the knee with canvas so tough he could slide down creek banks without tearing through. She reinforced Clara's school dress at the elbows and sewed a button back onto Rosie's coat that had been missing since February. She plugged the roof leak with pine tar and a square of old canvas. She organized the pantry so a man could find salt without moving 6 jars of nothing. But it was the meals that changed the shape of the days. Every evening, Ada set supper on the table, rabbit stew with real carrots and onion, cornbread baked golden in the iron skillet, beans seasoned with salt pork and a pinch of sugar that turned them into something worth sitting down for. And a thing happened at that table that hadn't happened in over a year. The children stopped fighting and started talking. Emmett told about a bullfrog he'd caught at the creek, big as his fist, with a voice deep as a church organ. Clara asked what temperance meant. She'd seen it in the family Bible and been chewing on it for days. Rosie didn't say much, but she laughed. A small, sudden sound, bright as a struck bell. That stopped every fork at the table and made even Emmett go quiet just to hear it. "Mornin's." Ada braided Clara's hair. She'd sit the girl on the kitchen stool and work the fine brown strands with fingers that knew exactly what they were doing. French braids on weekdays, ribbon braids for Sunday. Ada's hands moved slow and sure, and she felt the particular weight of a child's trust in that stillness, the way Clara leaned back into her touch. Eyes closed. Breathing easy. Ada hadn't touched a child's hair since before the fire. She'd forgotten what it did to a person that tender. Ordinary intimacy that cost nothing and meant everything. "Hold still, sweetheart," Ada murmured, tying off the end. "Almost done." Clara opened her eyes. "It's perfect, Miss Ada. It's always perfect." Every night, Ada read to them. She'd found a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress on a shelf and a book of fairy tales with half the pages gone. She read what was there and invented what wasn't, and 3 children leaned into her voice like plants bending toward light. Ada noticed Jasper watching sometimes from the hallway. He'd stand just past the doorframe, where he thought she couldn't see him, listening. Then he'd turn away and go to the porch, putting distance between himself and the sound of her voice reading his children to sleep. Like he didn't trust what would happen if he stayed. She knew that look. She'd seen it all her life, the glance that landed on the scar and slid off. Uncomfortable, guilty. That night, Clara said, "Good night, Miss Ada." Without being asked or reminded, Ada closed her bedroom door, pressed her palm flat against her breastbone, where something ached like a muscle being used for the first time in years. She could not afford this. She could not afford to want. The seat she saved. Here's the thing about children. They don't see scars. They see who shows up. By the time a month had passed, Rosie Reeves had made her decision, and no force on earth was going to change it. She called Ada Miss Ada, the way some children say Mama, with that particular weight in the voice that means you are mine and I am yours, and this is settled. Every meal, without fail. Rosie saved the chair beside her. If Emmett wandered close, she'd put her small hand flat on the seat and say, fierce as a barn cat guarding her kittens, "That's Miss Ada's place." Jasper watched it happen. He watched Emmett stop throwing things. The boy's anger hadn't disappeared. It had just found somewhere to go. Burned off in chores and creek explorations and the steady rhythm Ada had brought to their days. He watched Clara let Ada braid her hair each morning, teach her how to roll a pie crust without tearing it, show her the way to press wildflowers between the pages of a book. And he noticed he was coming in from the cattle earlier, just by a half hour at first, then a full hour, finding reasons a tool he needed, a question about supplies. Standing in the kitchen doorway a moment longer than necessary, listening to Ada hum while she worked low, tuneless, the sound of a creek moving over smooth stones. One evening after supper, Ada was wiping the table, and Jasper was lingering over his coffee in a way he never used to. "Rosie ate 2 helpings tonight," he said. Ada paused. "She's growing. Children eat when they feel safe." "Is that so?" That's been my experience. Yes. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full of something neither one of them knew how to name. Jasper looked at his coffee. Ada went back to wiping the table. Later that night, he sat on the porch, listening to Ada's voice drifting through the open window, reading to the children about a prince and a dragon, half of it invented, every word earnest. Rosie's giggle floated out into the dusk. Emmett asked, "Did the dragon die?" And Clara whispered, "Shh, let her finish." Jasper noticed his hands were still. Usually by evening they were clenched around a coffee cup, around the porch rail, around the habit of holding on. Tonight they lay open on his knees. He was seeing Ada, not the scar she carried, not the meals she cooked or the floors she scrubbed. He was seeing the way the lamplight caught the curve of her ear, the unscarred side. The scarred side, same warm glow on both. The small callus on her right hand where the needle pressed when she sewed. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking. A gesture so ordinary and so human it made his throat tight. At bedtime, Rosie tugged his sleeve. "Pa, is Miss Ada gonna stay forever?" Jasper looked at his daughter. He had no answer, and that the not knowing, the wanting, scared him worse than any storm he'd ever ridden through. Whispers carry gossip, and a small town moves like weather. You can see it coming, but you can't stop it. 6 weeks in, Ada went to town for supplies. She'd been putting it off, sending lists with the wagon driver, avoiding what she knew was waiting for her, but some things needed choosing in person. Fabric for Clara, who was growing so fast her dress hems couldn't keep up. Cough tonic for Emmett. A penny candy for Rosie, because the child had never had one, and that seemed like a wrong worth righting. The general store fell quiet when Ada walked in. The little bell over the door was still ringing when the silence hit. 2 women at the dry goods counter turned. Their eyes went to Ada's jaw, her neck, then to each other. One leaned close and whispered something behind her hand. Ada caught only the tail of it. His wife not even cold a year, and he's got that one living right there in the house. The storekeeper's wife smiled from behind the counter with the kind of politeness that could draw blood without leaving a mark. "Mornin', Miss Brennan. Didn't expect to see you in town." "Just needin' a few things," Ada said. She bought her goods, kept her face still as stone, walked out without hurry, because hurry meant they'd won, and Ada Brennan had lost enough in her life without handing away her dignity too. But in the wagon, heading home, her hands shook in her lap. She knew this music. She'd heard it her whole life, just in different keys, the whispers, the sidelong looks, the way a room could close around you like a fist. The scars had always been reason enough to set people talking. Now there was a new reason, a single woman living in a single man's home, tending his children, sleeping under his roof. It didn't matter that Jasper Reeves had never once touched her, beyond passing a plate at supper. Gossip don't need truth. It feeds on the space between what people see and what they want to believe. Back at the cabin, Ada set down the supplies in the kitchen, stood still for a moment, both hands flat on the table, breathing. Then she went to her room, pulled the canvas bag from under her bed, and packed it halfway. She'd survived leaving before. She could survive it again. Better to go now, while the choice was still hers, than to wait until Jasper heard the talk and decided she wasn't worth the trouble. She knew how that conversation went, the careful words, the avoided eyes, the quiet way a door closes when someone's decided you're too much cost for too little value. Then the cabin door banged open, and small boots came running down the hall. "Miss Ada! Miss Ada!" Rosie burst into the room, face flushed from the autumn air, fists closed tight around something. "I saved you the biggest biscuit. I told Emmett he couldn't have it, 'cause it was yours, and he said I was being bossy, and I said I don't care." Ada looked at the biscuit, lopsided, half-crumbled, clutched in a grubby little hand, and held out like it was made of gold. She set down the bag, knelt on the floor. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, and her voice only cracked a little. She stayed one more day, then one more, Then one more after that. That night, the autumn sky was clear for the first time in weeks, enormous, blue-black, heavy with stars. Dust storm season was over. The world was wide open and visible. And Ada stood on the porch looking up at all that terrible beauty and felt more exposed than she'd ever felt in her life. The locked door opens 8 weeks in, with harvest coming on and the cottonwoods turning gold along the creek. Jasper found the invitation tucked into the supply order, a printed handbill for the annual harvest dance at the town hall. Music, cider, dancing. The whole county would be there. He held it like a lit match. Taking Ada to that dance meant walking into a room full of every person who'd been whispering about his household for weeks. Meant standing beside a scarred woman in front of God and everybody and daring the whole town to say something. Meant admitting out loud, in public, to himself that this had become something more than an arrangement. He mentioned it over supper, casual as he could manage, eyes on his plate. Town's having their harvest dance Saturday next, if you wanted to go. Ada's hands went still over the dish she was drying. She didn't look up. I don't need to go. Jasper, it's no trouble. He heard what she really meant, clear as a bell. She was offering him the exit, saving him from gossip by sacrificing herself the way she'd done her whole life, quietly, without complaint, like her own wanton was a thing too small to mention. That night, children asleep, the cabin quiet. Jasper sat on the porch and did something he'd been avoiding for 2 months. He stopped lying to himself. His hand found the blue ribbon on the shelf beside the door, the same one that had fallen from Claire's hair that dust storm night in Chapter 1 of his unraveling. He hadn't touched it since. Ada braided Claire's hair now. Ada did everything now. He turned the ribbon between his fingers and reckoned with what that meant. Ada Brennan had walked into a cabin full of dust and grief and bolted doors, and she had opened every single one. She'd fed his children meals that tasted like someone cared whether they ate. She'd braided his daughter's hair with hands that knew tenderness the way his knew rope. She'd read stories by lamplight until 3 small heads fell against her shoulders, and she'd done it all expecting nothing, not gratitude, not permanence, not love, because the world had taught her a long time ago that she wasn't the kind of woman people kept. And he'd been letting her believe it, hiding behind the word practical, like a man hiding behind a fence post in a lightning storm. He looked at the cabin door, wide open to the evening air, warm lamplight spilling across the porch boards in a long gold rectangle. That door used to be bolted twice every night. He couldn't remember the exact evening it stopped, but he knew who had changed it. Not by force. Not by asking, just by being the kind of person you don't lock doors against. Jasper set down the ribbon, stood, walked inside. Ada sat by the lamp mending Rosie's dress, needle moving steady, head bent so the scarred side of her face caught the light. She didn't try to turn away from it. She never did. In this cabin, only in town. We're going to that dance, Jasper said. Ada looked up, startled. The needle stopped. Both of us. Now what happens next, I want you to remember this part. The dance floor, Ada wore her best dress, dark blue calico with a high collar and sleeves that came to the wrist. She told herself the collar was practical, nothing more. She told herself the trembling in her fingers as she fastened the buttons was just the evening chill. She almost believed it. Jasper drove the wagon into town without saying much. He'd put on a clean white shirt and combed his hair back with water. And there was something in the set of his jaw, a hardness, a decision that Ada had seen before. It was the look of a man who'd made up his mind about something and aimed to see it through come hell or high water. The town hall blazed with lantern light. Fiddle music poured through the open doors, a bright, scraping sound that mixed with laughter and the rhythm of boot heels on wooden planks. Half the county had turned out. Ranchers in their Sunday shirts, shopkeepers with their wives, children running between legs and under tables. The air smelled of apple cider, pine boughs, and tallow candles. Jasper came around the wagon and offered Ada his hand. She took it. They walked in together. The room noticed. Conversations thinned. Heads turned, first one, then a dozen. A few kind faces offered nods. Old Hank Dawson tipped his hat, and the schoolteacher, Mrs. Calloway, smiled and raised her cider cup. But most of the room just looked that particular quality of looking that happens when people are storing up material for tomorrow's talk. Ada and Jasper stood near the cider table, close to the wall. The fiddle swung into a lively reel. Children shrieked and chased each other between the dancers. Ada held a cup of cider in both hands and tried to feel like she belonged, tried to watch the dancers without feeling every glance that landed on her neck, her jaw, the tight, shiny skin that seemed to burn hotter under other people's eyes. Then a voice cut through the music, like a knife through new bread. What kind of father keeps a woman like that around his children? Mrs. Harlan, standing with 3 other women by the punch bowl, not even troubling herself to whisper, loud enough for half the room, loud enough for everyone who mattered, loud enough to strip the varnish off a church pew. The fiddle kept sawing, but the laughter died. A pocket of silence opened in the room and spread outward like a crack in river ice. Ada's fingers went numb around the cider cup. She set it down carefully on the table, the small, precise gesture of a woman who has learned to control the only things she can. Her shoulders drew inward. The old, familiar weight settled on her, not anger, not surprise, just the heavy gray blanket of a thing confirmed. She had always known this was coming. The only question had ever been when. She turned toward the door. Her shoe scraped against the wooden floor, a small, lonely sound in all that silence, and she took one step, then another. Then she felt his hand. Jasper's fingers closed around hers. Not the hand closest to him, the other one. The scarred one. The one she kept curled at her side, hidden in the folds of her skirt. Turned inward like something she was ashamed of. He reached across and took it deliberately, gently, firmly, and he held it the way you hold something precious that someone else has convinced you is broken. He stepped forward. She followed because his hand was warm and sure, and because her feet moved before her mind could stop them. He walked to the center of the dance floor. The lantern light fell on both of them. The whole room watched. Jasper turned to face them. Not just Mrs. Harlan. All of them, every curious eye, every whispering mouth, every soul in that room who'd had an opinion about his household and the woman in it. The kind, he said, and his voice carried clear and steady as a church bell across still water. Who knows what real beauty looks like? Silence. The kind of silence that fills a room when something true has been spoken, so true it leaves no space for argument, no crack for malice to slip through. The kind of silence that makes people look at their own hands and wonder what they've been holding on to and what they've been letting go. Then old Garrett, the fiddler, lifted his bow, drew it slow across the strings. A waltz, gentle and deliberate, sweet as clover honey, steady as a heartbeat. Jasper placed his hand on the small of Ada's back. She placed hers on his shoulder. They danced for a long moment. Nobody else moved. The music played for 2 people in the center of a lantern-lit room, and the whole world outside that circle of light held its breath. Then Hank Dawson cleared his throat, took his wife's hand, and led her onto the floor. Mrs. Calloway pulled her husband by the elbow. An old rancher named Willard, who hadn't danced in 15 years, stood up slow and offered his hand to the widow Patterson, who took it with tears in her eyes, one by one, couple by couple. The room began to move again. Ada looked up at Jasper. He was looking right at her, not at the scar beneath her ear, not at the tight, rippled skin along her jaw, at her eyes, at the woman behind them, and she understood finally, fully, with a certainty that went all the way down to her bones, that Jasper Reeves had never once looked at her scars. Not because he was blind to them, not because he was being kind, because they were never what he was looking at. Clear sea weeks later, on a morning so clear the sky looked like it had been washed and wrung out and hung to dry on the line, Jasper Reeves stood in his kitchen doorway and listened. Ada's voice drifted from the front room, low and unhurried, reading to Rosie before breakfast. Something about a rabbit and a garden, half the words invented. All of them gentle. Rosie sat curled in Ada's lap, head against her chest, one small finger tracing the pictures, while her lips moved along with the words she was learning to recognize. In the kitchen, Clara set plates on the table without being asked. Emmett poured milk into 4 cups carefully, tongue between his teeth, concentrating so hard his brow furrowed and didn't spill a drop. He looked up, caught Jasper watching, and grinned. "I've been practicing," he said. The cabin smelled of coffee and biscuits and something else. Something you couldn't bottle or buy at the general store or find in any catalog from back east. The kind of warmth that doesn't come from a stove. It comes from people who've chosen each other not because they had to, not because it was practical, but because something in them recognized something in the other and said, yes, this, here, stay. Jasper leaned against the doorframe. Same doorway he'd stood in that first morning, when the smell of biscuits had caught him off guard, and he'd gripped the frame to steady himself. Same kitchen, same man, but not the same, not even close. His hands hung open at his sides. The blue ribbon from that dust storm night was tied now in Rosie's hair. Ada had found it on the shelf where he'd left it and woven it into a small, perfect bow. Everything he'd let fall, Ada had picked up. Everything he'd locked shut, she'd quietly opened. The cabin door stood wide behind him. Morning light poured across the floorboards in a long gold wash, no dust, no grit on the glass, just clean autumn sun and the smell of a world that had come through its storm season and was still standing. Ada looked up from the book, saw him in the doorway, and for the first time in all the weeks she'd been there, maybe for the first time in her life, she didn't angle her face, didn't drop her chin, didn't turn the scarred side away from the light. She just looked at him and smiled, full and open and unafraid. Rosie patted the chair beside her, the chair she saved at every meal, every readin', every moment that mattered. "Sit down, Pa. Miss Ada ain't finished the story yet." Jasper crossed the kitchen, sat down in the chair his daughter had kept for him. Ada's hand rested on the table beside the open book, the scarred one, the one she used to hide, laying palm up in the morning light like an offering. He took it, held it, the way he'd held it at the dance, not carefully, not gingerly, but like it was the most natural thing in all the world. Because it was. Ada Brennan had come to a broken-down cabin 12 miles from town carrying one bag and expecting nothing. She'd found a man who never once looked at her scars, because he was too busy seeing everything else, the steady hands, the quiet voice, the heart that kept showing up day after day for 3 children who needed her, and a man too stubborn to say so. And his children, they saw her first. They always do, you know, children. They see what we spend our whole lives learning to look past. They don't care about the scar on your jaw, or the tear in your dress, or the story the town tells about you. They care about who sits beside them, who reads to them in the dark, who saves them the biggest biscuit and ties ribbons in their hair and says, "Hold still, sweetheart, almost done." That's what beauty is. Not the face the world sees, but the hands that show up every single day and do the quiet work of love. And sometimes it arrives on a Thursday supply wagon, carrying one canvas bag, and it changes everything.